You're listening to Who Were the Comedian Harmonists, the true story behind Broadway's Harmony. I'm your host, Ruthie Fierberg.
One of my favorite very early stories that I learned about Josef Roman Cycowski was he was always a singer. Music was always part of his life.
And he grew up in Łódź, Poland. There's this story of him when he was back in Poland and he was about to be beaten up by a group of boys. And he started singing. And because of how good he was, they let him go. That was the first time that singing saved him.
Josef Roman Cycowski had an incredible singing voice, just as Danny Kornfeld, who originated the young version of him in the musical Harmony, told us. Better known as Roman, he was the third Jewish member of the comedian Harmonists, and Cycowski is at least one pronunciation of his last name. Our resident historian, Jan Grübler, knows a few others.
When he was interviewed by the German TV maker, he called himself Cycowski. That is maybe the original Polish spelling of the name. But if you read it, especially as an English native speaker, then you may say Cycowski too, or Cycowski.
For our purposes, I'm going to refer to him predominantly as Roman Cycowski. Unlike Harry Fromerman and Eric Colleen, who were both born in Germany, Roman was born in Zien, Poland, about 13 miles south of Łódź. He was born on July 24th, 1901, which puts him in the middle of the group by age. Eric Colleen, born in 1899, and Ari Leshnikov, born in 1897, were older. Roman was born to an Orthodox Jewish family. His father was a cantor and also owned a spinning mill near Łódź. Am I correct that he is one of 9 children?
Yes, as far as we know, he had 8 siblings, and from a very, as you said, a very Jewish living family in Poland. And he, as a child, already was educated in singing in the Jewish choir and the school choir because of his wonderful voice.
There's one story that I heard that there was a parade passing by and he started singing a Jewish song and whoever it was, whether his parents or someone, covered his mouth because they realized his voice could carry very far.
Yeah, there are different stories and he told them himself. And there was some political struggle in that time in the early century between Poland and Russia. And it wasn't easy for Roman to know when it's good to raise the voice and when it's better to keep silence.
Do you know how he discovered not only that he could sing, but that he loved music?
Yeah. And I think he also very early wanted to become a singer, but it was quite impossible in his home.
He was parts of choirs.
This is Chip Zien, a veteran Broadway performer and the actor who originated the older version of Roman in Harmony.
But I think those choirs when he was young would have been religious music centered around the synagogue. Mm-hmm. And but he was part of big choirs. My sense of it was, because I try to relate stories to my life, he must have been, this is what I believe, as I was, a boy soprano. And he would have been, in these choirs. And then eventually he was quite young. He went to Germany to study opera.
Right.
But he describes at one point how his voice changed. Mm-hmm. And now he was a baritone and he was interested in becoming an opera singer.
In the musical, Roman's character is called Rabbi. Danny played young Rabbi, and Chip played the 87-year-old version of him, looking back on his life with the comedian Harmonists. Contrary to the musical, Roman was not training to be a rabbi before he joined the singing group. His father was a cantor like Harry's, and the two characters in Harmony bond over their father's shared profession. But Chip thinks there's another plausible explanation for calling Roman Rabbi.
What I've come to believe is that that, in fact, was his nickname because he was scholarly. And that he studied the Talmud, and he schooled as an Orthodox Jew, Hasidic, and that was family path. So I actually think that when he's referred to as rabbi, it is a nickname.
And it's about his intellect.
You bookish person, you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think it is, because I don't believe he ever trained really to be a rabbi. He sang in choirs as a child.
Mm-hmm.
His father was a cantor. And, one of the sort of details that I've learned is that he could sight read music accurately at a very early age, like 10. That's actually quite remarkable to be able to pick up a piece of music and look at the notes and sing it.
Don't I know it?
So that's hard to do.
Yeah, especially when you're young.
Yeah. So that's kind of amazing. But I actually, so that's that's what I believe is that.
That makes sense to me. There are people in my life who maybe not only are they bookish, but they like to sermonize a little bit. Yeah. And you go, okay, Rabbi.
Yeah.
So in truth, Roman never actually had plans to take up the rabbinate.
He also very early wanted to become a singer, but it was quite impossible in his home. And so he left Poland in the early 1920s.
Why did he choose Germany? Why not Austria? Why not anywhere else?
On the one hand, it was close to his homeland, and on the other hand, he has heard that there is a lot of culture and a lot of musical education and a lot of opera and theater in Germany, and the cultural life was very more developed than in Poland.
In fact, Roman's father was the one who told him to head to Germany to gain exposure to the arts and culture he so desperately craved. It was 1920 when Roman left. He was about 19 years old. But because he was draft age for the Polish army, he could not legally leave Poland. So he used his deceased cousin's papers. That cousin would have been 24. The plan was for Roman to get to Germany and earn money to save up for opera school. According to the Douglas Friedman biography of the comedian Harmonists, Roman first settled in Büten, Germany. Roman sang in the Schul choir in Büten, and the president of that synagogue owned a hardware store. Working at that store would become Roman's day job.
First, he was a clerk or a seller in a store. Then he was endeavored accidentally because someone heard him and said, "Oh, you have such a wonderful voice. Why don't you go to the theater?" And he had no idea about the German system of culture and theaters and operas.
As the story goes, the person who heard Roman singing around the hardware store happened to have a connection to the town theater. Her sister was the venue's secretary. So she made him an audition appointment. Roman went in and sang an audition piece in Hebrew because he didn't know German. The opera director asked what music this was, and Roman's knee-jerk response was to say it was, quote, Oriental. Different times. The director and leader of the orchestra asked him to sight read, and he did so well they hired him on the spot.
So he started to appear on stage, first as a chorus singer, and he took private lessons with opera singers who teach him in singing. And so he changed from place to place. He sang in different operas in northern Germany or northeastern Germany in the 1920s. And then he decided that he wanted to get a really educated voice, and that's why he has to make a study. And then he went to Berlin and studied singing at the Music Academy in Berlin.
Roman moved to Berlin in 1926. He was 25 years old. Tell me how he then becomes part of the comedian Harmonists.
During his studies, he already was a singer in the same chorus in the Großes Schauspielhaus, a big vaudeville theater where Biberti sang and where Lechnikov sang. And they brought him to Roman, and they told him, we will start a new group and we will develop a new style and we need more voices and you have a beautiful voice, come with us. And so he had an audition there, and it was fitting to the sound of the group, and so he stayed there. Roman Cycowski always said later that was only, from that point of view, only a first step. He wanted to try it, but later he wanted to become an opera singer, and he wasn't aware that he will stay with the groups for such a long time.
Oh, that's really interesting. What do you think kept him with the group? Just their success?
I think the success and the enormous amount of money they earned But he always wanted to try later, anytime later, I will become an opera singer and singing my solo songs. But then he had the same fate like the other three members of the Jewish community, that he wasn't able to stay in Germany after 1935.
Right, which I think it sounds like that would have been devastating to him, because I know that he gave up his Polish citizenship to gain German citizenship.
Yeah, that's right. It's better to say he became stateless, because the German embassy wrote him and they forced him to go back to Poland to serve in the army, and he won't do that. And then they have threatened him, if you don't go back to Poland, then we will take away your Polish citizenship. And they did it. And so the most time, Roman Cycowski was stateless. So he never became the German citizenship.
Oh, I see. And was that a problem when the comedian Harmonists were touring all over Europe?
No, the first time that was no problem. They didn't went to Poland for concert tours. Maybe that Roman Cycowski was the reason, because he had to fear, when I go back to my home country, then they will catch me. But there was a little problem if they had to go to the north, to the Scandinavian countries, then he always had to surround Poland. The others could go by train through Poland, and he had to surround it on a different way, mostly by ship. So they went there on different ways sometimes.
Oh, wow. Were there other things that were different about Roman than the other members of the group?
He was the most religious person. And also during the time with the comedian Harmonists, he was singing in synagogues as a cantor at least at the high celebration days they have. And so it's known that he went to Dresden and sang
the
there.
high holidays.
Yeah, the high holidays. He went to Dresden and sang there as a cantor.
So he did that at the same time as he was in the comedian Harmonists?
Yes. He always tried to arrange it that that day is no concert, or he is close to, or he had to rush there and to return quickly to take part in the concert. I think it wasn't very easy for him, but he proceeded that job for quite a long time, until 1931, 32.
Well, I guess the good news for him is that the Rosh Hashanah services in the synagogues is in the morning and concerts are usually at night.
Yeah, but if it's far away, you have to rush from Warsaw to Berlin with a train the same day.
So what I know about Roman's voice is that he was the baritone, which is kind of the anchor of the melody in a group, right? You know, Ari could sing high, have these beautiful moments. Bobby could sing low, give that depth to it, but you have to have someone in the middle. Does that sound right to you about Roman?
That's right. He had one of the basic voices, you can say, of that ensemble. And the other problem was that his German pronunciation wasn't so good that he could sing some of the solo parts. Roman was more in the background.
Do you think he was more in the background personality-wise also? Was he just agreeable? Was he everyone's friend? Or was he a strong personality?
No, he was, I think he was everyone's friend. He said to be very straight. He was loving all things have to be in order and everything has to be organized. He was a very perfect person, I would say. And I think they loved him, and they were good friends. And especially Roman was a good friend with Ari, because they both had roots from the eastern side and spoke a similar language formally, and they were in good contact. And of course, Roman all the time was a good friend with Harry. Even after the disbanding of the group and even after the war, they were in close contact.
He kept on talking about Harry and Bobby. And it was interesting, and this is in the documentary, not something he said to me, that he called Harry and said, "I need to see you before I die." And he flew to Germany and they had that reunion. You know, he didn't do it with Bobby. He didn't do it with Boats. He didn't, and that's where I got the idea that the two of them were the closest friends.
This is Bruce Sussman, the book writer and lyricist of Harmony. Roman was the last living member of the comedian Harmonists when Bruce started writing the musical, so Bruce reached out to him.
I hesitate to use the word interview about Roman. It's my own caution about characterizing what happened. I just let him talk. He talked about how he tried to make peace over and over again between Harry and Bobby. That gave me a handle into Roman's character, that he was a peacemaker.
If Harry was the logistical and musical glue of the group, the one who pushed them to success and held them together as an ensemble, then Roman was the one who held together the relationships. Danny Kornfeld, who, again, played the young version of Roman on stage, also investigated who Roman was as a person. Of the 6 comedian harmonists, 4 of them are in the Feshner documentary. And I know that you all have seen part 1 of this, kind of the piece that harmony encapsulates. That means you've seen Roman in the flesh.
Yeah.
What did you glean from just seeing him on camera, his demeanor, his physicality?
There's a stoicism to him, a centeredness, a groundedness, a calmness. And I found that to be really striking. I see a lot of my grandfather in him, who is also a Holocaust survivor. He left Vienna in 1938 to come here. And there's a twinkle, a brightness in the eye that I don't think that some of these men from this generation necessarily allow to come out maybe in their physicality or their emotionality. Yeah. But you can see that brightness still in their eye, and I saw that brightness in Roman's eye. Rabbi was known to be the one who was kind of the mediator, both in our story and in history. He was the emotional glue. Yeah. Both in our story and history.
From Roman's point of view, as he described in his own words,
most important were the comedian harmonists, not the individuals. We all agreed on that. We harmonized as human beings. We got on well together.
In terms of his groundedness and his demeanor, Chip felt it had to do with Roman's roots.
I get a sense of Europeanness about the character that I'm playing. There's a certain carriage, a certain European quality, and that's kind of how I think of what Roman was like in his time with the harmonists. He had a certain dignity about him.
What do you remember about the sound of his voice?
It was warm. I have one of my grandmother's sisters, she had 13 siblings, married a Danish fella who fled the Nazis. And it reminded me of my Uncle Ivan, this European sensibility, this very distinguished speech patterns.
He was a robust man, more so than me. I have to achieve that physically by, trying to sing with a true baritone sound. And I was impressed with that. I mean, he was truly an opera singer.
Roman stood out in terms of personality and voice. He's also the only member to recall an experience the comedian harmonists shared: meeting Hitler on a train. It's a true scene depicted in Harmony.
And suddenly, Hitler enters the car. That is to say, first came the whole elite, first Göring, then Hess and Goebbels, but the latter was behind Hitler. They were all on their way to Hamburg, where Hitler was to give a speech. So Hitler enters the dining car and goes by us real close. He did not look at us. He did not look at anybody at all. He just looked over everybody. Unfortunately, I have to admit that the man was very interesting. He had Wasserdausche eyes, real piercing eyes, and very serious, very, very serious. And as he passed me, my heart beat very loudly, and Fromerman's too, of course. But at that time, it was still not so bad. We had already accepted that there was no place in Germany for Jews, but that had happened before.
I want to talk about the disbanding of the original group. So, of course, Roman being one of the Jewish members, he couldn't stay in Germany if he wanted to work, which ultimately, probably saved his life as well as Harry's and Eric's. Tell me about him leaving Germany. Did he leave alone? Did he have a wife at the time?
Well, first of all, Roman has the same problem like the other Jewish members because all his dreams of a career in Germany were broken. And it was a good idea to went to a country where the people are speaking German language, like in Austria, and to proceed the success of the group there. I think he had no really other chance that time. And he was married to his wife, Maria. In English, she's called Mary. And she also stayed with him. And so she wasn't Jewish.
Mary Magdalena. Mary Magdalene. This Jewish boy falls in love with someone named Mary Magdalene and then asks her to convert.
Indeed, Maria Magdalena Panzram was born in Berlin in 1907. She and Roman met in May of 1929 in Cologne at a party thrown by the family of Roman's former girlfriend. According to Fechner, the documentarian, Erich Colleen was interested in Mary at first, but after seeing Mary and Roman dance together, Erich told his friend, "She means you." Roman and Mary began to date. In 1931, he bought her a candy store to operate, but it failed. By 1933, Roman wanted to make Mary his wife, but he was a religious man. As he recalled in the documentary, "I said, 'I'm very religious. Will you adopt the Jewish faith?' And she said, 'I'll think about it. If I do, I'll do it properly or not at all.' A few weeks later, she said yes. She committed not only to him, but to following him when his Jewishness led him to leave Germany."
Where you go, I will go. Where you walk, I'm beside you, my love. Where you are is where I want to be.
She went with him to Vienna and traveled with him all over the world.
And they were married before he had to leave Germany or after?
That's not really clear. They were not married in Germany, at least not in an official sense. And maybe they had a Jewish marriage in the synagogue. That's not very sure because there is no document or inheritance about that. But they married then later when they had to flee to London, then they married there because it was more easy for them to get passports and hotel rooms as a couple and not as two related persons. And then it was, I think, in 1938 when they married in London.
Those years when they went to Australia, they were doing 60 concerts. They would do tours of like 60 concerts. They were doing really quite well.
They were still quite popular.
They were really popular, and they were doing really well. They traveled the world. I mean, he didn't end up in California until 1941.
Right.
So, and the group stopped performing together, and it was 35.
Yeah, March of 35.
March of 35. So. And they continued. Basically the three Jews went off and continued singing.
As Chip referenced, Roman became a part of the comedy Harmonists, also known as the Vienna Group or the Exile Group that we learned about in our first episode. The group included the three Jewish members of the original comedian Harmonists, Roman, Harry, and Erich, and recruited new members. The new group was very successful and continued to tour the globe, even as the Nazis invaded countries around Europe.
Well, his wife Mary traveled with him, all the countries they visited. She also has seen. And then they had to flee in 1938 to London. And then they had to make a decision what we will do now. And I think the next they did is a big tour through South America, where Mary was with him. And she always traveled with him, finally even to the United States in 1940. And then when the comedy Harmonists broke up in 1941, they also had to decide what we will do now here. We can't return to Europe. We can't return to Australia. We have to stay here and to arrange and to earn money for living anyway.
The comedy Harmonists disbanded while touring in the U.S., largely because of Roman. He received news from the Red Cross that changed the course of his life. His father had died. In his own words,
"When I got the letter, I said to my colleagues, I promised my father that I would be a cantor. I said to Fromerman, I'll give you 3 months to find a replacement for me. I immediately took up a post as a cantor in Los Angeles. I hadn't set foot in a synagogue for 20 years, but immediately felt at home again."
Truth be told, immediate was not so instantaneous as that telling makes it seem. The comedy Harmonists were in New York at the time that Roman gave his notice. He and Mary drove across the country to Los Angeles, where Roman had a cousin. They opened a nightclub together in Palm Springs, California. At first, it did well, and it was the bar that Roman had offered Eric Colleen to work in, which Eric did for a while. In our episode about Colleen, his grandson Mark referred to it as a liquor store. But the tides turned after Pearl Harbor, and they had to sell the place. Luckily, Roman escaped without losing money. And then he was offered the job of cantor at Congregation Sha'arei Tefillah in Los Angeles. He served there for 6 years, through the end of the war. He had found success and music in America, but he also lived with heartache. He had lost his entire family to the Holocaust.
Do you know the story about the suits that he bought?
Correct me if I'm wrong, that the story is that he had bought himself suits that he then sent over back to Poland for some of his brothers to wear.
And then his sister, who was assigned in the camps of sorting clothes, found the suits after his brothers had been gassed. And his sister, who survived, went to Paris and killed herself.
Oh, gosh. Through the heartache, Roman dedicated himself to his cantorial duties. After Sha'arei Tefillah, he was the cantor for 25 years at Temple Beth Israel in San Francisco, which later merged with Temple Judea to become Congregation Beth Israel Judea. Later, he'd move back to Southern California. What do you know of Roman's life as a cantor?
He loved it, and members of the cast and I have all received emails from people who were bar mitzvahed by him or married, who he sang at their weddings. And they say he was just wonderful. And prior to Temple Isaiah, he was the head cantor at the largest synagogue in San Francisco.
Right. He went from Los Angeles to San Francisco to Palm Springs.
And in San Francisco, the temple would be like Emmanuel here in New York. There are recordings of him performing there. They actually made recordings that were made for public sale. And so he was a stalker. He was he was a big.
Have you heard some of those recordings?
I have, yeah.
Does the voice in those recordings sound like the voice in the comedian Harmonists?
Yeah. He was smart enough to know that when he was singing in a group, he had a blend. But except when he had solos. It's when he had a solo in the comedian Harmonists, that voice is the same as the voice from the temple. Although at the temple, he's bringing all of the melisma and all the stylistic cantorial traits, when he's singing.
There's someone else who went to hear cantor Roman Cycowski sing in person. Eric Colleen's grandson, Mark.
After my grandfather died in 1961, my grandmother and I took a train from Los Angeles to San Francisco and visited with Roman Cycowski and his wife, Mary, who were living in Marin County. And they also had found a new life in the United States. Roman was working as a cantor in one of the wonderful old Jewish synagogues in San Francisco. And Mary had created a lovely home life for the two of them, a life that was filled with light and with art and in a very nice kind of semi-rural suburban neighborhood of Marin County.
Did you get to hear Roman sing as a cantor?
I did. I got to hear, my grandmother and I both went to the synagogue where he sang, and we heard him sing, and he had a wonderful voice.
It came from his heart. He was a very, very religious person. He loved what he is doing there. He was very successful. He appeared on TV with big shows of Jewish singing. And he taught young cantors too. He was a singing teacher. And music was his life, you can say.
Music and Mary.
There's a great little video where they're playing cards. Have you seen that?
No.
Where they're playing gin, and they're being interviewed while they're playing gin. And Roman says to Mary, his wife, he says to the person who's interviewing, he said, she always wins. She was gin, she puts her cards down. He said, what else is new? She always won. So they seem to have just a fantastic relationship through all those years. And during the show, I try to think about that. So I have moments where I can look at Sarah Vargas, who plays Mary. Mm-hmm. But I what I've taken from Joseph's life, the rabbi's life, is how much he loved his wife. And so I get moments on stage where I'm just kind of looking at Mary, and we pick some critical moments where I just stand there and observe her. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a long relationship that was an amazingly warm, intimate relationship.
You get a sense of their playfulness with one another. And I think what I find so beautiful about their relationship, like you said, is that they went through so much together.
If you go or stay, I will love you as I do today. And all of you every single day from now
Josef Roman Cycowski passed away on November 9th, 1998, at the age of 97. That day was also the 60th anniversary of Kristallnacht.
He was the last of the members of the comedian Harmonists who died. And luckily, he could see the movie that was produced in 1997, the German cinema movie. And the director and some of the actors visited him in Palm Springs, and he could see the movie before he died.
What do you hope people remember about Roman?
I think, except from his voice and from his efforts for the group, for the development of the group, and for keeping the group together too, he was he was a connecting element between the members, I would say.
What do you get about his sense of the comedian Harmonists? Did he remember that time fondly?
Yes. Well, I think he said the most interesting, the fun thing to Barry. When Barry went over to his house, and the first thing he said was something to the effect of, "I'm so glad they remembered us. We would have been bigger than the Beatles."
So he knew.
Oh, yeah.
He could feel.
Oh, yeah.
The impact and the success.
And by the way, he was, at the end of his tenure, the oldest active cantor in the United States of America.
It's incredible.
And then I think it was 40 minutes we spoke. And as it was winding down, as I'm fond of saying, I think his rabbinical training kicked in, because he, for want of a better description, blessed me. He said, "Bruce, you sound like a lovely fella." He said, "I wish you as long and as a productive and as healthy a life as I have had." And I said, "Oh, Cantor, thank you." "Wait a minute, I'm not finished." I said, "Yes, Cantor." He said, "And when you reach my age, I hope that you, like me, will still be collecting royalties."
That's amazing. How do you sum him up?
I think the very real man was incredibly decent and generous and loving and smart and talented. And he carried a burden very successfully. And he was the only one of the six, to my mind, that had a fully integrated life.
Who Were the Comedian Harmonists? The True Story Behind Broadway's Harmony is produced by Harmony, a New Musical, and Broadway News, the home for digital journalism on Broadway. I'm your host, Ruthie Fierberg. Thank you so much for listening. To read more about the Comedian Harmonists, visit thecomedianharmonists.com. For more information about the musical Harmony, visit harmonyanewmusical.com. And of course, to learn more about all of the happenings on Broadway, visit broadwaynews.com. If you're fascinated by what you've heard so far on this podcast, please share the Comedian Harmonists story on social media and tag @Harmony, a New Musical and @Broadway News.